The first time I saw it, I was walking the trail behind Mackenzie Creek at dusk. It had been one of those quiet, unassuming days where the air hangs heavy and the world feels like it's holding its breath. I didn't think much of the woods at the time, just a stretch of nature separating one town from the next. But that was before I saw the cabin. I don't remember seeing it on the way in, but there it was, nestled between the trees like it had always been there. It was barely more than a shack, with sagging walls and a roof that looked like it could crumble with a stiff breeze. There was something off about it, though. It wasn't just the way it seemed to lean towards me, as though inviting me in. It was the absence of sound. No birds, no crickets, just silence. I should have turned back then. Every instinct told me to, but my curiosity got the better of me. When I pushed open the door, the smell hit me first. Damp wood, rot, and something else. A sharp, coppery tang that clung to the back of my throat. Inside, the cabin was sparse. A rickety table with one leg propped up on a block of wood, a single chair, and a fireplace filled with ash and charred fragments that looked suspiciously like bone. But it was the journal on the table that caught my eye. Its cover was worn, the edges frayed like it had been thumbed through 1,000 times. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The handwriting was jagged, almost frantic, scrawling across the yellowed pages like the author had been in a hurry or terrified. The entries were dated, and they started innocently enough. Observations about the woods, notes on the weather, sketches of the local wildlife. But then the tone changed. June 14th. Something's out there. I heard it last night, pacing the perimeter of the cabin. Whatever it is, it's big. Bigger than a bear. It doesn't sound natural. June 17th. I saw it today, just for a second, through the trees. Pale, gangly, its limbs too long for its body. It didn't move right, like it was mimicking a person and getting it all wrong. I don't think it's human. The entries became more erratic after that, filled with sketches of the thing, each more horrifying than the last. A tall, emaciated figure with hollow eyes that seemed to follow me, even off the page. The final entry was short, scrawled across the page in thick, uneven lines. June 21st. It's here. The sound of a branch snapping outside the cabin made me drop the journal. My heart slammed against my ribs as I froze, listening. The woods were alive now, but not with the comforting rustle of wind or the hum of insects. It was a low, rhythmic creak, like wood bending under pressure. It was getting closer. I bolted. I don't remember much of the run back to the trailhead. My body moved on autopilot, adrenaline drowning out everything but the primal instinct to get away. By the time I stumbled into my car and slammed the door, my lungs were burning, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. When I finally got the car started and tore out of there, I told myself I'd imagined it. The cabin, the journal, the sounds. I even convinced myself not to tell anyone. Who would believe me? But then the scratches appeared. A few days later, I noticed them on the passenger side of my car. Long, deep grooves that hadn't been there before, like something with claws had raked across the metal. That night, I dreamed of the cabin. I saw the creature from the journal, its hollow eyes staring at me as it whispered something I couldn't understand. The next morning, there were muddy footprints on my porch. I tried to stay away from the woods, but it didn't matter. The thing had followed me home. First, it was just the dreams. Then I started hearing noises at night, scraping sounds outside my bedroom window, a soft tapping at the back door. Once, I thought I heard my name, whispered in a voice that sounded almost human but not quite. I didn't sleep after that. One night, I woke up to find the journal on my nightstand. The same journal from the cabin, the one I'd left behind. The pages were blank now except for one. In the center of the page, scrawled in the same jagged handwriting, was a single word, run. I don't know why I went back to the woods. Maybe I thought I could end it somehow. Maybe I was just desperate. All I know is that the cabin wasn't there when I returned. The trail was overgrown, the clearing where it had stood swallowed by trees. But I could feel it watching me, just beyond the edge of my vision. I don't go into the woods anymore, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear the creaking. and I know it's still out there, waiting. I thought I could forget. I thought if I stayed far enough from Mackenzie Creek, I'd be safe. But it wasn't long before I realized the woods weren't just in the woods anymore. They were with me, and so was it. It started with the dreams. The cabin, the journal, that thing. But then the dreams became something else. I'd wake up in places I didn't remember going to. My backyard, the edge of the neighborhood, once even at the old gas station 2 miles down the road. I'd be barefoot, my clothes damp with morning dew, scratches on my arms and legs like I'd been running through brambles. Then came the smells. It was subtle at first, a faint whiff of rot in the air, like something dead and damp. But it grew stronger, lingering in places it shouldn't have been. My living room, the hallway outside my bedroom, even my car. One night, I woke to find the smell was strongest right beside my bed. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, clutching a baseball bat in shaking hands. The next morning, I found muddy smudges on the hardwood floor. Desperation drove me to research. I spent hours online, searching for anything about Mackenzie Creek, the cabin, the creature. What I found wasn't comforting. Old newspaper articles told stories of disappearances near the woods, dating back decades. Hikers, campers, even a park ranger, all gone without a trace. A few survivors had come forward over the years, but their stories were dismissed as the ramblings of traumatized minds. They spoke of a pale figure, of something in the woods that wasn't meant to be seen. There was one story that stood out, a man named Gregory Tate. He'd vanished near Mackenzie Creek in 1997, only to reappear 5 years later, wandering along a highway miles from the woods. He couldn't remember where he'd been, but his account of the thing matched mine. Pale, emaciated, with limbs too long and a face too hollow. Gregory had died in 2003. Suicide, the article said. I knew I couldn't keep living like this, so I decided to confront it. Maybe it was stupid, but I couldn't take the sleepless nights, the constant feeling of being watched. I had to end it one way or another. I packed a bag with supplies. A flashlight, a hunting knife, a first aid kit. I left a note on my kitchen table just in case. If I didn't come back, at least someone would know where I'd gone. And then I drove back to Mackenzie Creek. The woods were different this time. The trail I'd walked before was gone, swallowed by the undergrowth. The trees seemed taller, their branches thicker, blocking out the sun. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, and every step I took was accompanied by the sound of twigs snapping behind me. Even when I stood perfectly still, I wandered for what felt like hours, the weight of the bag on my shoulders growing heavier with each passing minute. Just as I was starting to think I'd made a terrible mistake, I saw it. The cabin. It looked worse than before, if that was even possible. The roof was caved in, and the door hung off its hinges. But the smell, it was the same. Rot and copper, so strong it made my eyes water. I stepped inside. The journal was on the table just like before. But now the pages were filled. Every line was covered in that frantic handwriting, and every sketch was of the creature. Its hollow eyes, its impossibly long limbs, the way it always seemed to be lurking just out of focus, like a smudge on the lens of reality. And then I heard it, the creak. It was the same sound I'd heard the first time, that slow, rhythmic bending of wood. It came from outside the cabin, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. Just trees, swaying in a wind I couldn't feel. Then the creak came again, closer this time. And then I saw it. It stood at the edge of the clearing, half hidden by the shadows of the trees. It was even worse in person, its movements jerky and unnatural, like it was a puppet being controlled by someone who didn't quite know how humans were supposed to move. Its head tilted, and though it had no eyes, I knew it was looking at me. My body screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It took a step forward, its long limbs folding and unfolding like a spider. Then another step, and another. The cabin door slammed shut behind me. The journal burst into flames on the table, the pages curling and blackening in an instant. The smell of burning paper mixed with the stench of rot, choking me. I grabbed the knife from my bag, gripping it so tightly my knuckles turned white. The creature stopped just outside the window, its hollow face pressed against the glass. And then it smiled. The smile vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving its hollow face pressed against the shattered remnants of the cabin window. My body finally obeyed my brain's screams to move, and I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the journal still smoldering on the table. Smoke curled up, stinging my eyes and filling the air with that acrid, choking scent of burning paper and rot. The thing outside cocked its head, jerking unnaturally to one side, its limbs twitching like it was testing the limits of its form. It was playing with me. I bolted for the door. The cabin's door slammed shut before I could reach it, the sound echoing like a gunshot. My heart pounded in my ears as I spun around, clutching the knife so tightly my hand went numb. The creature was gone from the window, but I could feel it. It wasn't outside anymore. It was in here with me. The shadows inside the cabin seemed to deepen, pooling into the corners and pressing against the walls like the space itself was closing in. My breathing was ragged as I scanned the room, every instinct screaming at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. And then, from the darkness, I heard it. That creak. Slow, deliberate, rhythmic, wood bending under weight that shouldn't be there. It was moving, circling me, its presence shifting from one corner of the room to the next. My flashlight flickered as I swung it around, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. "Why did you come back?" The voice echoed, not in the room, but inside my head. It wasn't words. It was more like thoughts being forced into my mind, sharp and invasive, like barbed wire pulling apart my sanity. I gritted my teeth, fighting to keep control of myself. "Leave me alone," I shouted, though the words felt feeble, useless. "I don't know what you want." The voice returned, colder this time, seeping into every crevice of my mind. "You brought me here. You fed the forest. You read the words. The cabin remembers." "I didn't mean to." My voice cracked as I turned in frantic circles, the flashlight barely cutting through the oppressive dark. "I don't even know what this is." The creak stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating, a void that pressed against my ears and made the room feel 1,000 times smaller. Then, from the corner of the room, it emerged. It didn't walk. It unfolded. Its limbs stretched impossibly far, its torso twisting and bending like liquid. As it stepped into the beam of my flashlight, I realized just how wrong it was. Its body was pale, almost translucent, but the surface rippled like smoke trapped in glass. Its face was a hollow void, yet it seemed to focus on me, pinning me in place with its empty gaze. "Run," it said. The voice didn't feel like a command, felt like a promise. And I ran. I didn't look back. My feet carried me out of the cabin, down the uneven porch steps, and into the suffocating maze of trees. The woods were alive now, the air vibrating with an energy that made my teeth ache. Branches clawed at my arms and legs as I tore through the undergrowth, my flashlight bouncing wildly in my hand. Behind me, I heard its slow, deliberate steps, far too heavy for something so thin. The forest itself seemed to conspire against me. The path I thought I remembered was gone, replaced by a labyrinth of twisted roots and thorny vines. My breaths came in ragged gasps, my lungs burning as I pushed myself to keep going. But no matter how fast I ran, the creak was always there. Closer, closer. I tripped, crashing to the ground and losing my grip on the flashlight. It rolled away, the beam flickering out as it came to a stop. Darkness swallowed me whole, and for a moment, all I could do was lie there, gasping for air and listening. The creaking stopped. The silence was worse. I reached for the knife in my belt, my fingers trembling as I gripped the handle. The darkness pressed against me, so thick and heavy it felt like it was alive. I strained my ears, desperate for any sound, anything to tell me where it was. And then, just inches from my face, I saw it. A single, hollow eye stared at me from the shadows. It didn't blink. It didn't move, but I could feel it boring into me, peeling back the layers of who I was. I clutched the knife tighter, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. "You don't belong here," the voice whispered, soft and cold, the words dripping with malice. "But I'll make you part of it." Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I swung the knife, aiming blindly at the darkness. The blade met resistance, a sensation like cutting through wet cloth. The thing recoiled, a guttural, inhuman noise filling the air as I scrambled to my feet and grabbed the flashlight. I ran again, not caring where I was going, as long as it was away. When I finally burst out of the woods and into the pale light of dawn, I collapsed onto the gravel road, my body shaking with exhaustion. I turned back toward the trees, expecting to see it there, watching me. But there was nothing, just the quiet rustle of leaves. For now, I sat on the gravel road, my chest heaving, staring at the tree-line as the sun rose behind me. The pale light of dawn illuminated the twisted branches, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for me. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and the knife I still held felt like a useless toy against whatever that thing was. I told myself I was safe. I was out. But deep down, I knew better. The woods weren't finished with me. The drive home was a blur. I barely remember starting the car, much less navigating the winding roads back to my house. Every glance in the rearview mirror felt like a mistake. Half the time, I thought I saw movement in the distance, something pale and wrong keeping pace with me just beyond the edge of the road. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my nerves were shredded. I sat in the car for what felt like hours, staring at my house and trying to convince myself I'd made it, that it was over. But when I finally stepped inside, I knew I'd been wrong. The smell was waiting for me. That same coppery tang, mixed with rot and damp earth, clung to the air in my living room. It wasn't just faint this time. It was overwhelming, as if the cabin itself had followed me home. I dropped my bag by the door, gripping the knife tighter as I scanned the room. Nothing was out of place. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. But the smell wasn't all. The air felt wrong, thicker, heavier, like it was pressing down on me. My skin prickled, and the back of my neck burned with the unmistakable feeling of being watched. And then I saw the footprints. They started in the middle of the living room, muddy smudges leading across the floor and up the stairs. Each print was large, too large for any human, with elongated toes that ended in sharp, claw-like impressions. My stomach turned as I followed the trail, my every instinct screaming at me to get out, to leave, but I couldn't. I had to know. The footprints ended outside my bedroom door. The smell was strongest here, seeping through the cracks like a living thing. I raised the knife, my hand trembling, and slowly turned the handle. The door creaked open, revealing an empty room. My bed was unmade, the curtains drawn tight against the morning light. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it all. But then I saw it. The journal. It was sitting on my bed, the same one from the cabin, its cover scorched and blackened as though it had been pulled from a fire. I stepped closer, my breath catching in my throat. The pages had been filled again, the writing more frenzied than before, scrawled in jagged lines that cut deep into the paper. And then I heard it, the creak. It wasn't coming from the room. It was downstairs. I spun around, the knife raised, and bolted for the stairs. The smell was suffocating now, clinging to my skin, filling my lungs. As I descended, the creaking grew louder, more deliberate, echoing off the walls. It was in the living room. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I froze. The front door was wide open, swinging slowly on its hinges. The sunlight outside was pale, muted, as though the day itself was dying. And in the doorway, standing half in shadow, was the thing. It was taller now, its limbs longer, its movements slower but no less unnatural. It ducked its head as it stepped inside, its hollow face tilting toward me. The air around it shimmered, warping like heat waves on asphalt. It didn't speak this time. It didn't have to. I felt its words in my head, a whisper so cold it made my vision blur. "You're part of the woods now." The knife felt useless in my hand, but I gripped it anyway, backing away as it advanced. Every step it took seemed to stretch time, each creak of the floorboards echoing endlessly in my ears. My back hit the wall, and I realized I had nowhere left to go. But then, something changed. The sunlight shifted, breaking through the doorway in a sudden burst of brilliance. The thing recoiled, its form flickering like a bad signal on an old TV. It turned its hollow face toward the light, and for the first time, I saw something new. Fear. It staggered backward, its limbs jerking violently, and let out a sound that wasn't a scream but felt like one, raw and guttural, like the death throes of something ancient. It stumbled out of the house, back into the shadows of the woods, and disappeared. The smell lingered for hours, but I didn't dare move. I sat on the floor, clutching the knife, staring at the open door and the bright, unassuming sunlight beyond it. The woods had retreated, but they weren't gone. They were waiting. I don't go near Mackenzie Creek anymore. I've moved, changed my number, burned the journal. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the shadows are long, I hear it. The slow, deliberate creak of wood bending under weight. And I know it's still out there, watching, waiting, for me to come back. You'd think that was the end of it, wouldn't you? That the thing was gone and I could finally get my life back. I thought so too. For a while, I even believed it. I convinced myself the woods had retreated, that the creature had been banished by the light. But the truth is, the woods don't need to come to you. You carry them with you. Started small, a shadow moving in the corner of my vision. Gone the moment I turned my head. Objects disappearing and reappearing in places I was sure I hadn't left them. At first, I chalked it up to paranoia, the lingering trauma of what had happened at Mackenzie Creek. But then the sounds started. Late at night, I'd hear the floorboards creak as though someone was walking through the house. My bedroom door would shudder as though caught in a breeze, but the air would be still. And sometimes, I'd hear my name soft, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. Come back. I told myself it wasn't real. I told myself I was imagining it. But deep down, I knew the truth. The thing hadn't left. It was still with me, waiting for the moment when my guard was down. And then, one night, it stopped waiting. It was just after midnight when I woke to the sound of something shattering. My heart leapt into my throat as I grabbed the knife I kept under my pillow. The house was silent, but I could feel it. Something was wrong. I crept downstairs, every step slow and deliberate, the knife clutched tightly in my hand. The living room was dark, but the moonlight streaming through the window revealed the source of the noise. The front door had been thrown open, the glass pane shattered. The faint scent of rot hung in the air, and then I saw the footprints. They were the same as before. Large, clawed, and wet, like they'd been made by something that had just crawled out of the swamp. They led from the door to the center of the room, where they stopped abruptly. My breath caught as I realized there was no sign of anything leaving. It was still in the house. I backed away, my pulse pounding in my ears. The shadows in the room seemed to shift and writhe, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement. Something pale and impossibly thin darting just beyond the edge of the moonlight. I turned and ran for the stairs, but I didn't make it. The creak came from behind me, louder than ever, and I felt something cold brush against my neck. I spun around, swinging the knife wildly, but there was nothing there. Just the empty room and the long, looming shadows. But the air was different now, heavier, more alive, and then it stepped into the light. It was taller than before, its limbs stretched impossibly long, its body twisting and bending as though it were made of smoke. Its hollow face was no longer just empty, it was hungry, and when it smiled, I saw rows of jagged, glistening teeth. "You can't run," it said, its voice filling the room like 1,000 whispers layered over one another. "You're already mine." I didn't respond. Couldn't. My legs refused to move, my breath caught in my throat. All I could do was watch as it took a step closer, and then another, the floor creaking under its weight. "Give in," it whispered, leaning down until its face was inches from mine. "Let me make you whole." In that moment, something inside me snapped. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was anger. I don't know. But I screamed, raising the knife and driving it into the thing's chest with every ounce of strength I had. The blade sunk in, but it didn't bleed. It didn't even flinch. Instead, it smiled wider, its hollow face twisting into something grotesque and triumphant. "Is that all?" it asked, its voice dripping with mockery. But then the room began to shift. The moonlight grew brighter, its beams cutting through the shadows like a knife. The creature's smile faltered, and for the first time, I saw it hesitate. "No," it said, its voice softer now, almost uncertain. "This isn't right." The light grew stronger, flooding the room until I could barely see. The thing let out a guttural scream, its body twisting and contorting as though it were being pulled apart. And then, with one final, ear-piercing shriek, it was gone. I don't know how long I sat there, clutching the knife and staring at the empty room. The sun was rising by the time I finally moved, my body aching and my mind numb. The house was quiet again, but the smell of rot still lingered, faint but undeniable. I know it's not over. The light saved me this time, but the woods don't forget. They're still out there, waiting for the moment when I'm weak enough to return. And when that day comes, I don't think I'll make it out again. It's been 6 months since the last encounter. 6 months since the creature vanished in a flood of light. On the surface, my life seems normal again. I go to work. I sleep, though never without the knife under my pillow. I even laugh sometimes like I used to, but the truth is, I'm not living. I'm waiting. I don't tell people the full story. They wouldn't believe me if I did. Instead, I've become the person who loves the outdoors but never hikes anymore, or the neighbor who really should fix that broken window, but can't bring myself to touch the frame where the glass shattered that night. But the signs are still there. It's subtle, a shadow that lingers a little too long on the edge of my vision, a breeze that carries the faintest hint of rot, even on a clear, crisp morning. And sometimes, late at night, I hear it. The creak of wood, slow and deliberate, like it's testing the boundaries of this place. I've moved twice since that night. Each time, I've gone further from Mackenzie Creek, further from the woods. But no matter where I go, it follows. The footprints are always the same. Large, wet, clawed. They show up in places that make no sense. On the tile floor of my apartment or once on the roof of my car. They're never accompanied by sounds or sightings. Just the prints, as if to remind me that I'm never truly alone. The journals returned 3 nights ago. I woke to find the journal on my nightstand. I burned it 6 months ago, watched the flames consume its pages until there was nothing left but ash. But here it was, the cover charred and brittle, the pages filled with writing that wasn't there before. "You're part of the woods now." The words repeated on every page, over and over, until the very last line. "It's coming back." I don't know what to do. Running hasn't worked. Fighting didn't stop it. The light saved me once, but I don't know if it will again. I've spent hours researching, digging through obscure forums and archives, trying to find anything that might help me understand what's happening. But every thread leads back to the same grim conclusion. The woods don't let go. A final stand? Last night I had a dream, or maybe it wasn't a dream. I was back at Mackenzie Creek, standing in the clearing where the cabin once stood. The trees were taller than I remembered, their branches twisting together to form a canopy so dense that no light could break through. The creature was there, waiting for me. It didn't move, didn't speak. It just watched, its hollow face somehow more menacing than ever. And then it smiled. I woke up with mud on my shoes. Now I'm sitting here, writing this, knowing that my time is running out. The woods are calling me back. I can feel it in the air, in the way the shadows in my house grow darker with each passing night. I don't know what will happen when I go back. Maybe I'll find a way to stop it, or maybe I'll disappear, like so many others before me. But one thing is certain. The woods don't forget, and they don't forgive. If you're reading this, stay away from Mackenzie Creek. Stay away from the cabin. And whatever you do, if you hear the creak of wood at night, don't look. Just run. I didn't plan to go back. I swore I never would. But the woods don't care about promises, and neither does whatever lives within them. The dreams are worse now, more vivid. Every night, I'm back at Mackenzie Creek, standing in that clearing, surrounded by trees that seem to lean closer with every breath I take. And every morning, I wake up with more signs that the boundary between my world and theirs is crumbling. Last night, it wasn't just mud on my shoes. There were twigs in my bed, damp with morning dew. The faint smell of rot was there, too, clinging to the air like a warning. When I looked at the mirror in my bathroom, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Scratches on my neck, like claw marks. The message is clear. I can't run anymore. Preparing for the end, I've spent the past 24 hours gathering everything I can think of. Flashlights, batteries, salt, fire starters, even an old revolver I inherited from my grandfather. It feels ridiculous, like I'm preparing for some kind of ghost story. But I've seen what the woods can do. I know better than to rely on logic. The journal is sitting on my desk as I write this. I tried burning it again, but the flames refused to catch. I even soaked it in gasoline, but when I lit the match, the fire just flickered out. The journal is waiting, just like the woods. And now, so am I. The return to Mackenzie Creek, the drive to Mackenzie Creek felt like the longest of my life. Every mile brought the same uneasy sense of déjà vu, as though the trees themselves were watching me, whispering my arrival to the thing waiting in the shadows. By the time I reached the trailhead, the sun was setting, casting long, skeletal shadows across the dirt path. I parked the car and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. Then I stepped out, leaving the keys behind. I knew I wouldn't need them. The trail was overgrown, the once clear path swallowed by thorny vines and tangled roots. I pushed forward anyway, the flashlight in one hand and the revolver in the other. The air grew heavier with each step, the silence broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot and the faint creak of the trees swaying in a wind I couldn't feel. The clearing, when I reached the clearing, it was exactly as I remembered it. Empty, lifeless, and wrong. The cabin wasn't there anymore, but the space it had occupied seemed darker, as though the ground itself had been stained by its presence. And then I felt it, that same oppressive weight, that sense of being watched. The air grew colder, my breath visible in the dim light of the flashlight. The creak came next, slow and deliberate, like a predator announcing its arrival. I turned, and there it was, the thing. It was different now, taller, thinner, its limbs stretched to impossible lengths, its hollow face twisted into something resembling a mask of rage. It didn't speak this time, but I could feel its words in my mind, a flood of anger and hunger that threatened to overwhelm me. "You came back," it seemed to say, though the words weren't spoken. "You belong here." I raised the revolver, my hands trembling. "I'm not afraid of you," I lied, my voice barely a whisper. The thing tilted its head, its hollow gaze boring into me, and then it smiled. I fired the first shot, the sound echoing through the clearing like a crack of thunder. The thing recoiled, its body flickering like static on a broken screen. But it didn't fall. It didn't even bleed. Instead, it lunged forward, its long arms reaching for me with an impossible speed. I threw myself to the ground as its claws slashed through the air where I'd been standing. The flashlight rolled away, its beam dancing wildly across the trees. I fired again and again, each shot doing little more than slowing it down. The journal was on the ground beside me, its pages fluttering in the wind that wasn't there. Desperate, I grabbed it and tore it open, searching for something, anything, that might help. And there it was. The light, the final page of the journal wasn't blank anymore. Scrawled across it in that same jagged handwriting was a single phrase, "Burn the heart." I didn't understand at first, but then I looked at the thing. Its chest was glowing faintly, a pulsating light that I hadn't noticed before. The knife was still in my belt. Without thinking, I grabbed it and charged. The thing screamed, a sound that was less a noise and more a force, like the forest itself was crying out in agony. But I didn't stop. I drove the blade into its chest, straight into the light. The glow flared, blinding me, and the thing let out one final, deafening scream before collapsing. The aftermath, when I opened my eyes, the clearing was empty. The thing was gone, its body reduced to ash that scattered in the wind. The journal was gone too, the pages burned to nothingness. The woods were quiet again, the oppressive weight lifted. I don't know if it's truly over. I don't know if the woods will let me go, or if the thing will find a way back. But for now, I'm alive, and that's enough. If you ever find yourself near Mackenzie Creek, don't go in. Don't read the journal. And if you hear the creak of wood bending under weight, run. It's been a year since that night in Mackenzie Creek. A year since I drove a knife into that thing's heart and watched it collapse into ash. Life has been quieter since then. Quieter, but not normal. Not really. The woods don't haunt my dreams anymore. They don't send shadows skittering across the edges of my vision, or fill my house with the stench of rot. But there's a weight that's never left me. A feeling that I'm being watched, that I'm not as free as I want to believe. I tried to move on. I really did. But the woods don't let go that easily. The letter 2 days ago, I found an envelope in my mailbox. There was no return address, no stamp, just my name scrawled across the front in a handwriting I didn't recognize. I almost didn't open it. I wish I hadn't. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded neatly in half. Written in the center of the page were 3 words. "It's not over." That was it. No explanation, no signature. But I knew what it meant. The woods weren't finished with me. The next morning, I noticed something strange on my arm. At first, I thought it was just a bruise, a faint discoloration on the inside of my wrist. But as the day went on, it darkened, the shape becoming clearer. It wasn't a bruise. It was a mark, a circle surrounded by jagged lines that looked almost like roots. No matter how hard I scrubbed, it wouldn't fade. It pulsed faintly when I touched it, sending a strange warmth through my skin that made my stomach turn. I don't know what it means, but I think it's a warning, or a promise. The shadows returned that night. I saw the shadows again. It was subtle at first, just a flicker in the corner of my vision, gone as soon as I turned my head. But then they became more persistent. Shapes moving across the walls of my bedroom, darting through the hallways of my house. They didn't make a sound, but I could feel them. Watching, waiting. The smell came back too, faint but unmistakable. Rot, damp earth, copper. The same smell that had filled the cabin. The same smell that clung to the air every time the thing was near. I didn't sleep that night. The call this morning, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. There was no one on the other end, at least not at first. Just static. And then, faintly, a voice I hadn't heard in a year. "You can't escape." It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was calm, almost amused. But it froze the blood in my veins all the same. The line went dead before I could respond. Back to the creek, I know what this means. The woods are calling me back. I don't want to go. Every part of me is screaming to stay away, to run, to disappear. But I know it won't matter. It'll find me no matter where I go. So I've decided. I'm going back to Mackenzie Creek. Not to fight, not to run. To end this once and for all. The mark on my wrist has started to spread. The jagged lines crawling up my arm like roots burrowing into my skin. I don't know what's happening to me, but I can feel it. The woods are inside me now, and I can't let them take me completely. The final stand, I'm writing this as a record, in case I don't make it back. If you're reading this, know that I didn't go willingly. The woods have claimed too many lives already, and I won't let them take anyone else. If I don't return, stay away from Mackenzie Creek. Burn this letter. Forget my story. And whatever you do, if you hear the creak of wood at night, don't look. Just run. This will be my last entry. By the time you read this, I'll already be at Mackenzie Creek. I'm not coming back this time. I don't think I can. The woods have made that clear. They've taken everything from me. My peace, my sense of safety, my future. Now they want what's left. Me. The path changes. The drive to Mackenzie Creek felt different this time. The air was heavier, thicker, like the entire world was holding its breath. When I reached the trailhead, I noticed the trees had grown even taller, their trunks twisting unnaturally as if they were leaning toward me. The path was almost unrecognizable, overgrown with thorny vines and moss-covered roots. But the woods wanted me to find my way. The trail practically unfolded in front of me, each step pulling me deeper, guiding me toward whatever waited in the clearing. And I felt it, that familiar weight, the oppressive sense of being watched. The woods weren't hiding anymore. They wanted me to know they were alive, awake, hungry. The clearing was exactly as I remembered it. But now the air shimmered like heat waves rising from asphalt. The ground felt soft, like it was breathing beneath my feet. In the center of the clearing stood something new, a tree. It wasn't like the others. Its bark was pale and smooth, almost white, and its branches twisted into the sky in unnatural angles. At its base was a gaping hollow, black as pitch, and pulsing with the same faint light I'd seen in the thing's chest. The tree wasn't just alive. It was waiting. The thing returns. I didn't need to turn around to know it was there. The air grew colder, and the smell hit me in waves. Rot, copper, and something else, something ancient and wrong. I gripped the knife in one hand and the revolver in the other, but I knew they wouldn't help me. "You returned," the voice said, slithering into my mind like oil. "Good. You belong here." I turned to face it, and for the first time I wasn't afraid. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or maybe I'd finally accepted what was happening. Either way, I stood my ground. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice steadier than I expected. "Why me?" The thing tilted its head, its hollow face almost curious. "You called to us," it said. "You opened the door. Now you will close it." The ground beneath the tree began to tremble, and the hollow at its base grew brighter, its light pulsing in time with the thing's movements. The voice filled the clearing, louder now, deeper, reverberating through my chest. "Burn the roots. Feed the woods." I didn't understand at first, but then I looked down and saw the journal lying at my feet, its pages open to a new entry. The words were scrawled in jagged lines, barely legible, but clear enough. "To end this, you must begin again. Feed the roots with what you took. Give the woods their due." I knew what it meant. It wanted me, my life, my blood. The mark on my wrist burned hotter, the jagged lines now crawling up my neck. The woods had already taken so much from me. Now they wanted it all. The choice. I stepped toward the tree, the hollow glowing brighter with each step. The thing watched me, silent now, its form flickering like static. I reached the base of the tree and looked into the hollow. It wasn't just a hole. It was a void, endless and consuming, pulsing with the same rhythm as my own heartbeat. I raised the knife, its blade catching the faint light of the void. My hands shook, but I held firm. I could feel the woods pressing in around me, their weight suffocating, their whispers growing louder. And then I made my choice. The ending. I plunged the knife into the tree, driving it deep into the pale bark. The clearing exploded with light, blinding and searing, and the air filled with a sound that wasn't a scream but felt like one. A roar of anger, pain, and something else. Relief. The ground trembled violently, the roots of the tree writhing like living things. The thing let out one final, guttural cry before collapsing into ash, its form dissolving into the earth. The light from the hollow flared brighter and brighter, consuming everything around me. And then there was nothing. Aftermath. I woke up on the edge of the trailhead, the morning sun warm against my face. The woods were still, silent, their oppressive weight gone. The mark on my arm had faded, leaving only a faint scar. The journal was gone. The tree, the thing, everything. It was as if it had never existed. But I know better. The woods are quiet now, but they're not gone. They're waiting just as they've always been. Watching, listening. I may have closed the door, but doors can always be opened again. If you find yourself near Mackenzie Creek, don't stop. Don't look. And for the love of God, don't go into the clearing. The woods never forget. I thought it was over. The woods were silent. The mark on my arm was gone. And life, normal, fragile life, was waiting for me. But the truth is, you don't come back from something like this. Not really. Even now, as I write this, I can feel it. Not the oppressive weight of the woods. Not the creature's hollow stare, but something subtler. Presence. Connection. Like a thread tied between me and the place I fought so hard to escape. The woods may have let me go, but they haven't forgotten. And neither can I. The final sign. A week after I woke up at the trailhead, I noticed something strange. My backyard, which had always been bordered by a clean, wooden fence, was different. One section had been replaced with tall, gnarled trees, their branches twisted and reaching like skeletal fingers. I didn't plant them. I don't even know how they got there. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. But every day, the trees seemed to grow closer, their roots spreading toward my house. And at night, when the world was quiet, I could hear it. The faint creak of wood bending under weight. The woods come home last night. I woke to find mud on my floor again. It trailed from the back door to the middle of my living room, stopping abruptly, as if whoever or whatever had made it had disappeared into thin air. The smell was back too, faint but unmistakable. Rot, damp earth, copper. And this morning I saw the mark. It's not on my wrist this time. It's on the window in my bedroom, traced in condensation from the night. A circle, surrounded by jagged lines. The same mark that once burned into my skin. A reminder, a warning. The woods are here now. They've come to me. The choice I never had. I don't know how much time I have left. The shadows are longer now, even in the middle of the day. The air is colder even when the sun is shining. And the trees, they're everywhere. Not just in my backyard, but in the streets, in the park, even in the reflection of the mirror when I'm brushing my teeth. They're not just watching me. They're surrounding me. I know what they want. I thought I ended this when I drove the knife into the heart of that pale tree. I thought I closed the door, but I didn't. I didn't end the woods. I just gave them a new beginning. The final act, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Not dead. No, I don't think the woods will let me die. Not really. But I'll be part of them now, just like they've always wanted. Maybe that's why they let me survive this long. They didn't want to kill me. They wanted to claim me. I'm not gonna fight this time. There's no point. The woods have already won. So I'm leaving this record, one last piece of me to prove that I was here, that I existed. If you ever find yourself near Mackenzie Creek, don't stop. Don't look. Don't listen. The woods don't need an invitation. They'll take you anyway. Run. Run, and don't stop running until you're far, far away. And even then, it might not be enough. The woods never forget. And now neither will I.